is April 18. We are in Stockholm, a chilly but gorgeous day. We are sitting in the library of the Department of Neurosurgery in Karolinska Hospital. My name is Ladislau Steiner, and I am interviewing Professor Torgney Greitz, emeritus professor and member of the Academy of Science, of the Swedish Academy of Science, past member of the Nobel Assembly. Torgney, we know each other, I think, since 30 years. So it's a pleasure for me to interview you on behalf of the AANS, or as is better known, the Cushing Society Archives. It's an archive who want to preserve for the future generation the achievements of the leader in neurosciences. And when I was proposed to make some interviews with Scandinavian neurosciences, you were one of the first to think about. Your personality is so rich, and it would be very difficult to comprimate in 60 minutes everything what you are, everything you achieved. But shall we start to find out how was your childhood, how is your background, your parents, and how did you grow in the medical sciences and the neuroradiology?
I think that I was very fortunate to be born into a very culturally very stimulating environment. My father was a journalist, later became a press attaché at the Swedish embassy in Copenhagen, and he ended as general counsel on Åland in the Finnish archipelago.
It seems that he was a very handsome.
Yes,
and
this is a portrait made by a Russian professor of art, and of course he was quite young at that time. I think that his achievement, if we spoke about that, were lie in the fact that he edited in the early 30s a cultural and liberal publication called Fönstret, meaning the window. And that publication had as contributors the whole, I would say, culture elite in Sweden. It included a couple of Nobel winners in literature. It included lawyers, Hugo Lindberg, who was the foremost lawyer in Sweden and a representative of Sweden at the Nuremberg trial. And there were also doctors and architects who wrote there. And the paper was quite famous, but unfortunately, economically, it was a disaster.
But it was a publication which had a clear-cut, even a politically clear-cut position against Nazis, against Hitler.
Yes, they presented to the Swedish public very early in the 30s a series of articles where they described the Nazi movement to the Swedish people. And they had, for example, a series of articles by Leon Furchtwängler, and as a consequence of that, this was the first paper that was outlawed in Germany. It's the first Swedish paper outlawed in Germany by Hitler. And of course, this period in my father's life made that he made a lot of important acquaintances. So he was good friends of several members of the Swedish government, the Social Democratic government. And of course, he knew all the foremost artists and writers and so forth. These people also visited my home, and I, in a very early time, I had the opportunity to talk with many of these, I would say, leading Swedish figures. Among these people who were there were also my predecessor that we're going to talk about, Erik Lysholm.
Lysholm, who was the father of neuroradiology.
Of neuroradiology, you would say.
Not of Swedish, we can say of
yes,
neuroradiology, yes.
And as an example, I can show you that he, this photo from my father's birthday, you can see my parents are sitting there, and there is Erik Lysholm, and participating in that party.
And I see even the Premier Minister of Sweden is there.
Yes, to come, Torgney Greitz, and this is the wife of the Prime Minister at that time, and this is myself giving a speech.
A toast at the birthday of your father,
yes.
Now, your mother was also a very talented person.
Yes, she was quite an artist. And I used to say that also I myself and my brother was painters, but I used to say that only my mother did something which was of real professional quality. And this is a portrait of her made by myself. And these are some proofs of
her artistry.
Of her artistry, yes. She did broderies, usually of wild flowers. And she picked them and made the brodery without making any drawing in advance. So she made brodery directly from the nature, so to speak.
And it's clear that it was in your genes, or in their genes, everything that developed then in you. And you, in an early childhood, already painted, and you had the talent to articulate your ideas, even in earlier and then later. Can you speak about that a little, about your work in the art?
My first intention was to be a teacher in linguistics, but my second thought, and that was quite serious, was to become an artist. And my parents asked one of the very talented and foremost Swedish artists. He actually was my teacher in painting, and whether I should go into art or not. And his answer was, if the boy is not very successful in school, I will advise him to go to be an artist. But if he is good at school, I will discourage him very definitely.
So maybe it was unfortunate for the art that you were a good student.
And this is a painting of my teacher in painting of myself at the age of 11, painting on this
chef d'oeuvre.
Chef d'oeuvre, still Leben,
yes. And he is a later piece of work what you did.
Yes,
sculpture.
I turned more or less into sculpture. I realized perhaps that my talent for three-dimensional thinking was better than my talent for making a good composition in colors.
Now, it's clear that you had a sense for beauty and for form, and then you decided for medicine.
Yes.
And you entered the university in Karolinska Institute.
Yes.
To study medicine, and after then you decided to do what? What did you decide? What did you want? Did you know from the start that you want neuroradiology or not?
No, not at all. Although I already, as a boy, as I told you, I learned, I got to know Erik Lysholm, whom you call the father of neuroradiology. But I had no intention to go into radiology. As a matter of fact, I remember very well when I decided to study medicine. I read a book by Paul de Greef called Microbe Hunters. And so I wanted to be a bacteriologist and a scientist. And of course, I had an uncle, the closest friend of Erik Lysholm, actually, who also inspired me very much to choose medicine.
But then you decided for surgery.
Yes.
And first, you sought to be a plastic surgeon.
Yes.
To combine your sense for beauty and for form. Yes.
Yes. And, but I found that I couldn't continue with surgery because of the fact that as I said, I took the patients home. I was too anxious that I had at any operation had made some fault. So I was not, did not sleep after an operation, even it was a simple operation for hernia, quite well until I the next morning saw the patient quite well in bed.
But it's very interesting what you told me, that as a young surgeon, you made two beautiful diagnoses missed by the radiologist.
No,
is it so? Yes.
That's how I came into radiology.
Yeah.
Within, I think, 1 week, I discovered a cancer at the sigmoid cancer, which the radiologist at the Serafimer had missed. And also at my very first cystoscopy, I discovered a pea-sized papilloma, which it took the surgeon who should operate it almost 2 hours to find. And they had missed that too by cystoscopy at the X-ray department. So the chief at that time, Erik Lindgren, the successor of Erik Lysholm, was a neuroradiologist, he said that this is evidently a boy with sharp eyes. He has to come to us and become a radiologist. But for some reasons that I don't can get into here, perhaps I didn't dare to go to the Serafimer X-ray department, so I applied for a position at Södersjukhus, at the Southern Hospital.
But finally, you were in the Serafimer Lazaret, this mythic place of neuroscience, of Swedish neuroscience and indirectly of world neuroscience, where Oliver Krona, Lysholm, and Anthony Niels, the neurologist, did work. So you arrived there. Let us focus on this period of your life and on these personalities, which certainly were very important for your development.
Yes. As I told you, I started radiology at the Södersjukhuset, but my mentor there was a pupil of Lysholm and Lindgren, Stig Löfstedt, whose enthusiasm really made me decide to go into neuro. And by some circumstances, I began to be trained in neuroradiology right after having had only 2 months of general radiology. So when 4 years later, I arrived to the Serafimer, I already had 4 years of neuroradiology. And there the same things happened, that people that were before me were for some reasons left the hospital, and I was very early introduced into neuroradiology also, and had at a very early time a responsibility for neuroradiology at the Serafimer. For example, I was the one who followed Oliver Krona at his rond when he went around with a patient.
Neurosurgical rounds. And you were the neuroradiologist too.
And you had to at each bed show the X-rays of that very patient to Oliver Krona, because then he made the decision for the next week. This was every Saturday. For the next week, what he was going to operate. But
let us give the background. It was Lysholm, the neuroradiologist, the first neuroradiologist in the world, and you showed me once a characterization of Lysholm by one of the English early neuroradiologists. And he writes there that Oliver Krona couldn't make the surgery what he did without having this young neuroradiologist, Lysholm, telling him where to go in.
Yes.
Yes. Tell me about the Serafimer Lazaret, of these personalities, these archetypes of the neuroscience.
Yes. I arrived there in 1954 to the main entrance of this very old hospital. It's actually Sweden's oldest hospital. It started in 1753 with 12 beds for 24 patients, and this is the ancient entrance. The X-ray department was founded in the beginning of the 19th century, of the 20th century, and
there was the first beds for neurosurgery, the first neuroradiology. So it's really the source of today's neurosurgery and neuroradiology.
Yes.
Please characterize a little Lysholm and Lindgren.
I think that the fact that you had that very fortunate development was due to the fact that we had a very good cooperation between the heads of the various departments. Oliver Krona was there, Antoni, a rather famous Swedish neurologist, and also Erik Lysholm. And they made a very good team. And of course, Lysholm's contributions were very significant. And as an example of that, I could perhaps read here a statement of Ian Mosley, who is presently the director of the X-ray department at the National Hospital in London. When my mentor James Bull went to Sweden in the late 1930s to learn neuroradiology, he did so because William McKissock, the neurosurgeon who wanted his services, sent him. When Willie first went to Stockholm, he asked, "How do the surgeons always open the head over the lesion? Why don't they ever look on the wrong side for a subdural hematoma with ipsilateral signs, or mistake frontal ataxia for a cerebellar tumor?" The answer was that they had a clever young man who took X-ray pictures of the patient and told them where to make their incision. This was Erik Lysholm, whose name James Bull gave to the department of which I have recently had the honor to become the 5th director.
How were these people? Excellent professionals, but as human beings, were they mellow? Were they nice with collaborators? How were they?
Yes, I think that Lysholm was, to begin with him, was a rather shy person, and in many ways he tried to avoid contacts. I know one story when they came a foreign visitor and asked for Professor Lysholm, and he happened to ask Lysholm himself in the corridor, and Lysholm answered, "No, Lysholm is not here, but Professor Lindgren Erik Lindgren is downstairs, and he will receive you." And he had a very peculiar habit to suddenly disappear from a company without anyone noticing it. He was a rather shy person, but he was a member of a very gifted family. Actually, his brother was professor of technology at the Technical University here in Stockholm.
Now, Lindgren, in contrast, was a very tough, hard like a nail, yes?
He was rather shy too, but he was had a much tougher attitude than Lysholm, and the discipline there was very hard. If, for example, you were 1 minute late to make an arteriogram, you could enter the room and you will find that the patient had the needle already in the neck. Lindgren has been there, put in the needle, passed through, and just to show that you had not been in time for your work.
You told me an anecdote which
Yes.
gives excellently the atmosphere there. Tell me.
Yes. He had, as I said, a very hard discipline and a rather stern face. And so there was a story that one of his co-workers was asked, "How does your boss look like when he is in good humor?" And the answer was, "I don't know. I've only been here for 6 months." But I want to say that although this was a very tough time, I used to say with William Blake that it was a mixture of heaven and hell, and there was a lot of fun with the work there. It was a very stimulating environment, and Lindgren, who I would say that Lysholm has an extraordinary creative genius. So Lindgren had an extraordinary critical genius. He always applied scientific thinking to every case, more or less. How can you be sure? How do you know that? What proof do you have for that? Was the question that always followed us for every case.
Now, they were for the discipline, they were very hard in this respect, but at the same time they were supportive with the young people,
Yes.
with the talented people, yes.
Very stimulating and supportive.
And they attracted a lot of talented people from abroad and from Sweden. Yes?
This was, Stockholm was then called the Mecca of neuroradiology. And as
it was also the Mecca of neurosurgery. Yes.
for Europe, perhaps.
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
Oliverkanal has been called Europe's Cushing.
Yeah.
Yes, because people in Europe came to train with Oliverkrona, and they came to train with Lysholm and then Lindgren. And as an example, I can say that out of the 14 presidents for our big international meeting, the Symposium Neuroradiology, 8 of the presidents have been trained in Stockholm.
So actually when in Stockholm there was already an established neuroradiology. In other parts of the world it was a wasteland. Can we say that? Take the States. How was in the States with the neuroradiology
of course,
at that time, in 30s or later in the 40s?
I must say it was not as developed as in Sweden, and I think this was due to the fact that it was neuroradiology was carried out by the neurosurgeons. Of course, they didn't have time enough to develop the methods and the time to get the vast experience that you need. So, this fact, I think, was due to that the Swedish X-ray department had, from the very beginning, an independent situation. They were not depending on any other department. No. So
now, it's very important that you knew this Swedish neuroradiology, and you knew also the American radiology and neurosurgery, because you, at an early stage of your career, spent a time in St. Louis, isn't it?
Yes.
Please tell me about this time of yours in St. Louis. The American colleagues will be very interested of your impressions at that time. When was that? In which year?
This was in 56 and 57.
Yes.
And the head of the neurosurgical department at that time was Henry Schwartz.
Yes.
And
was that a neuroradiologist there at that time?
No. No, it was not.
So actually you were invited because they would have wanted to have some input from a Swedish neuroradiology
yes.
there.
Lindgren was invited. He made a trip to the States in the early 56, and came back and said that he had been asked to send one of his pupils to come over and to teach neuroradiology at the Mallinckrodt Institute in St.
And you were there, and how long time?
It was 1.5 years.
Shortly, tell me some of your impressions and some glimpse of these personalities there. Schwartz was a very famous neurosurgeon at that time.
Yes,
and please.
And he had said that he had heard about that we were doing, for example, pneumoencephalograms with lumbar puncture in patients with increased intracranial pressure. And he had told my boss, Hugh Wilson, that with the hand on my Bible, I will never allow such a procedure. It took me 1 month to convince Henry Schwartz that we should do it. When I made the diagnosis by pneumoencephalography, after that they have failed to get that diagnosis with ventriculography.
How was with the angiography at that time? Who did it?
It was also the neurosurgeons. So when they got the X-ray department got a requisition from the ophthalmologist to make angiography on a patient with a carotid sinus fistula. I did the procedure, and Henry Schwartz get very mad. He said, you know, you don't have to do this. This is a neurosurgical procedure. And so why don't you operate the patient too? And I said, well, I think all the patients need is a carotid ligature. So if you want me to, I could do it. I think I could manage that. I had some experience with surgery. So. And at that time, we had no other treatment than ligature.
Finally, it was a happy end. They liked you, and they wanted you to stay.
Yes, I was invited to stay to begin with to do research with another 2 years, and to work together with the physicist Mike Terpagosian to develop methods for the diagnosis of intracranial lesion using positron-emitting isotopes. So that was already in '57, a very early stage. And of course, I thought a lot of it, but finally I decided to go back to Sweden.
What did attract you mostly to Sweden?
Yes, of course, I had relatives and so forth. But I remember that I thought a lot of that I would not have the chance to spend the summers sailing in the Swedish archipelago.
Archipelago, yeah. You were really sailor. You liked
yes,
all
yes.
your life to sail.
This is
yes.
myself, and this is the Baltic race in the background.
You still are sailing?
Yes, but not as extensively as before. I used to live on board for 6 or 7 weeks every summer in the old days.
Now, you were back in Stockholm, you were back in the Serafimer Lazaret, or where came you back actually? To Serafimer or already to Karolinska sjukhuset?
Yes, I came from the States. I spent a short time at the Karolinska, and because I became professor of diagnostic radiology in northern Sweden, where I stayed for 4 years, and then I came back to the newly opened, the new neuro radiology department at the Karolinska, because all the Serafimer clinics had at that time moved over from the Serafimer to the Karolinska.
Now, let us concentrate on your activity. But I would like just to be able to put in a real perspective, your personality, to show the multifaceted personality what you are. Let us start with your literary activity, which actually was a cultural revolution in Sweden when you were as a student.
Perhaps not a cultural revolution, but a cultural scandal.
Please tell me a little about that.
Yes, I had a classmate in medical school, Lars Gyllensten, and we spent one evening for fun trying to write modern poetry, and this was all a joke. We gave each other words that we should make a poem out of. So after 3 or 4 hours, we had quite a collection of poems, And so we decided to send them in to the foremost publisher of Sweden. And much to our surprise, they accepted it. They
not only accepted it, they said that the new Swedish poetry was born.
No.
No?
There was just, and the critics were not too good, but nobody said that this is a very bad collection of poems. So, but then we disclosed the joke after a couple of months, and so then it was quite a sensation.
The title of the book was Camera Obscura.
Means the dark room.
Yeah.
Or of course, it's also a name of the primitive for camera.
So two young medical students drinking beer during a night, they write a little volume of poetry. They send in the morning to the editor, and it is accepted. And it is recognized that a good poetry, and that these two young fellows tells them it was just a joke. And of course,
this was quite a sensation. So
a sensation and a scandal.
Yes, big headlines here. This is the painting a donkey in poetic version. A poetry book was fabricated in 5 hours. Nonsense by a serious poet. And medical students fabricated a poetry collection in 1 night.
That is also interesting. Litterära Köpeniket, diktverk på 50 man. Yeah. Yes. But actually, what is interesting is that in the perspective of the time, after 20 years, one of these young students became a famous Swedish writer.
Yes.
And the
he also became the first. This is my co-author, Lars Gyllensten. Who,
yeah.
He is considered one of the foremost authors in Sweden. There is a school book from Strindberg to Gyllensten.
Yes.
And he became the secretary of the Swedish Academy, so he used to announce the prize in literature for the World Press every year, and then he became the director of the Nobel Foundation, and for many years he gave the inaugural speech as at the prize ceremony in Stockholm.
And the author, Torgney Greitz, became also, as I told you, and as his tie shows, a member of the Swedish Academy of Science, the member of the Nobel Assembly, and world name in neuroradiology. So it was not so simple. It was not just a joke, and it was talent in this little thing. And I have to tell you that I still treasure in my library one of these volumes of Camera Obscura, where Torgney, I don't know how many years ago, wrote me a dedication to Ladislau in memory, or Camera Obscura to Ladislau in memory of our collaboration in Camera Clara. Yes. Now, what happened during this period of your active neuroradiological service? You did a lot of things. Shall we take only the most important things, which are even today seminal and crucial in neuroradiology? What was your first contribution?
I wrote together with Löfstedt a paper on ectasia of the arteries, and described for the first time the hydrocephalus caused by impression of the elongated basilar artery into the third ventricle. And we also suggested that this was a condition which was different from arteriosclerosis. And we studied histologically and found that there was this patient had a defected elastic tissue in the media, and that arteriosclerosis is more primarily a disease of the intima. And also later I wrote together with one of my pupils a work in which we proved that arteriosclerosis, as seen radiologically, was positively, arteriosclerosis was positively correlated to triglycerides, although ectasia was negatively correlated. And this, I think, is, but we never succeeded to have any, to get these work published, because for some reasons the referees, this was too controversial,
yeah.
Didn't believe in.
Then, you described 4 vessels.
Yes, yes, that came. Yes, that was after I had written my thesis. But I used to do a lot of vascular anatomy using radiographs, and so I think if we described the 4 cerebral vessels for the first time.
Which were those?
These were the medial and lateral choroidal arteries. Formerly, there was, in the anatomy books, you could read about the posterior choroidal artery, but this is actually 2 different entities, one going out lateral to the temporal horn, one turning medially over the third ventricle and supplying the plexus of the third ventricle. And then we described also the posterior pericallosal artery, and finally the meningeal branch of the vertebral artery, which is the straight upward continuation of the main trunk of the vertebral artery.
Now, your PhD thesis was a milestone, actually, not only in neuroradiology, but of many things which happened then. What was it? It was a circulation study.
Yes, I studied the cerebral circulation using rapid serial angiography, and actually at the Serafimer, the first cut film changer had been constructed, and so I worked with that to study cerebral circulation, and I compared the results measuring circulation time with an isotope method of my own. And actually at that time, not even the physicist at the Atomic Research Institute here in Stockholm could make a recording with continuous recording by time. So I had to reconstruct my own apparatus, which was a combination of a scaler and an ECG apparatus. And this work was then the direct inspiration, for example, for Ingvar and Lassen. Actually, David Ingvar called me up and wanted 2 copies of my thesis, and then he suggested to Niels Lassen that they should inject their isotopes into the carotid artery to measure blood flow, like with regional detectors, as I have used in my thesis.
And that was the development of Larsson's...
Lassen's yes, the renal cerebral blood flow studies.
Yes.
And that has been acknowledged, for example, by Marcus Reichel, who wrote in the history of blood flow measurements that renal cerebral blood flow measurements were introduced by Lassen and Ingvar, following a lead by Greitz.
But not only that, then it inspired also Oldendorf
Yes.
in his early contribution to the development of the CT
Yes.
scan. You have here something. Could you read this?
No, but this is not. We have to. Here it is. I think that you read it. Here is what Oldendorf wrote.
Yes.
I read myself.
Fine.
He is here for the first time describing his method, Oldendorf's methods of studying the cerebral circulation with isotopes. My interest in the transit time of the brain-blood compartment was stimulated originally by Acta Radiologica Supplement number 140, published in 1956. This is a most admirable piece of work by the Swedish radiologist Torgney Greitz, taking multiple serial angiograms and so forth.
I mean, this piece of work illustrates one of the characteristics of creativity, because it was seminal for so many later contributions, and very important contributions in neuroradiology. Then, at the same time, you made also development work concerning instrumentation. Your collaboration with Schoenander was very important.
Yes.
Please, tell us.
Because I followed then an old tradition, because the founder of the Schoenander factory was a good friend of Erik Lysholm, and they had started with the Lysholm or Schoenander skull table, for example, was a product of their cooperation, and also the Lysholm grid, which is used in still used in all the X-ray departments, was a product of that cooperation. So I could, as I told you, I was able to use the first AOT serial film changer, and then when I found that it was sometimes quite difficult to handle the patients for pneumoencephalography, and we were beginning to have tomography and fluoroscopy included in the procedure. I asked George Fretzel, the chief engineer there at the Schoenander, later Elema Schoenander factory, that I wanted a unit in which we could bring the patient into any desired position and at the same time have instant fluoroscopy and instant tomography, which was not available before that time. And the result of that was that we had this rotating chair, which we could, or somersaulting chair, in which we could turn the patient all around to move the head into the desired parts
So
of
it
the
was not necessary to take the child from the leg and
this
keep
was how
it
the
up.
child was handled, yes, for pneumoencephalography, or turn the patients in such awkward positions like here when I'm at the certificus, it is filling the temple horn.
Now, then you were among the first in the world to have the CT scan, the third CT scan installation in the world.
Outside England, yes.
Outside England was in Stockholm.
Stockholm, yes.
Very soon a monography came
Yes,
on the work achieved with this.
Yes, yes.
Yes. And then you explored the PET scan.
Yes.
The idea from St. Louis was actualized. You initiated the work with the PET scan in Sweden, in Stockholm. A new machine was built. And please tell me about the activity with this PET scan. What do you think? What did you achieve? What are the future possibilities with this PET scan?
Oh, that was a lot of questions. Actually, we had plans to, even before we knew about computer tomography, to work with positrons. As I just mentioned, I had been invited by Terpegosian, who actually built the first PET scanner in the world, to work with positrons. So I decided, together with the professor of clinical neurophysiology, Lennart Widén, that we should embark upon a positron emission project, yes. And so when we had started to make applications for grants, computer tomography came along, and then we applied together with a professor of physics, who actually was a good friend of mine, to build a positron camera. We didn't get any grant to begin with, so he sent one of his pupils over to the States, where they built, he and also a Professor Chu, who is a pupil of, from Stockholm University of Physics. So these people together built the world's second positron camera. And then we got the grant so we could pay Lars Eriksson's way back home, and then he, at Stockholm University, at their shop, he built the world's third positron camera. And we could present that at the symposium in Wiesbaden in '78. And then we have developed many other generations, and it was also sold commercially by Scanditronics company.
But what I think it was also original, that your idea was to do this examination in the PET scan stereotaxically,
Yes,
to make with the same coordinates all imagings.
Yes. That, of course, I realized from the very beginning, when I applied for a grant to buy the first scanner, one of the main projects there that I suggested was to use CT for stereotaxic work. So, and it also was acknowledged by Lexell that I, together with Bergström, introduced stereotaxic computed tomography. So it was then quite natural to include also positron emission tomography in that concept. And we were then doing stereotaxic biopsies, for example, based on information obtained at positron emission tomography. And we could also stereotaxically transfer information from one unit into another. Actually, we included all the diagnostic system by, I developed a fixation system that allowed us to transfer information from angiography, skull examinations, PET, SPECT, CT, or whatever you think. Even today, magnetoencephalography.
And that inspired also to go in depth in stereotaxy. You described coordinate computing.
Yes,
in stereotaxy.
We wrote that paper
together with Bergström, yeah.
Bergström, yes.
And
but that's a very funny story, because we thought we originated that idea, but we found out later that This method was described already in '61 by an American physicist, Watson Olbers.
Yeah.
And then I was invited to give them in England the Mackenzie Davison Memorial Lecture. And then I found that Mackenzie Davison in 1898 described a method for stereotaxic localization using this graphical solution of ours. So that only proves that nothing is new under the sun.
Under the sun.
Yeah. And he even constructed an apparatus for stereotaxic intervention.
And of course, you and your pupils then came out with tens and tens of publication with this illustrating this new concept with PET and other imaging, MRI, CT scan, and
yes.
But it was a logical step then for you to jump in producing an atlas.
Yes. I was inspired of that work, I think, from an article that I read in Scientific American about the British zoologist and mathematician Darky Thompson, who had proven that you can transfer the anatomy of any species into another species just by a simple mathematical transformation. For example, he could transfer a human skull into that of a chimpanzee, and the skull of a chimpanzee into that of a baboon, by quite very convincingly showed that in drawings that this transformation could be made. And then I thought, well, if you can transfer one species into another, it should be no problem to transfer one individual to another. So then I constructed, by making multiple slices at autopsy, a standard brain, and was able, working together with a physicist, I constructed a computer atlas with which we were able to transform the images of any individual into the shape of the standard brain. So we made all the brains quite alike, to look the same anatomically. And then, of course, when they have the same shape anatomically, you can compare functional differences. So you can look at the cut of one individual and compare that with the same cut. If you have, let's say, you look at the function, which you do with positron. Let's say the glucose consumption or the blood flow increase following a certain activation. You can then compare that in different individuals with the same anatomy. So you can actually subtract one image from the other. So you can get the subtraction view of the difference between two materials. And you can have, for example, construct a mean of, let's say, the glucose consumption in normal individuals. And then you can take the glucose consumption, let's say, of a patient with disease, let's say one patient with schizophrenia, and subtract his image from the mean. And then you can see, in that subtraction, you can see any deviation from the normal in that very individual. And you can also get an image of the significance of this difference.
So actually, you have an anatomic and functional map of the brain,
yes,
and which is valid for all imaging.
Yes.
I mean,
yes.
MRI, CT scan, PET, and everything.
Yes.
And that is of enormous importance, it seems to me, when now surgery, both stereotaxy and microsurgery, is done by CT-guided or MR-guided surgery. Is this map already available, is published, and
Yes.
it's already
published
available.
in Journal of Computerized Tomography. And,
Yeah.
and actually, I have a pupil who is making his dissertation next month on the computer program for this atlas.
Now,
I also think
yes.
that one important aspect then could be that if you have, as you said, a collection of normal images, let's say PET scans with different tracers and so forth, you can use that in your clinical work by taking an individual and look at, of course, the primary images, but you can also look then at subtraction images and at significance images to see in which areas and in which respect this patient differs from the normal. So that will be, I think, an important clinical tool and a step towards an automatization of the diagnosis. So I remember when I first started to work on this, one of my co-workers said to me, "You are sawing on the branch you are sitting on."
Now, this rich scientific activity opened for you the faculty of the prestigious Karolinska Institute. You became a member of the Nobel Assembly, and you have a lot of memories about this activity of yours within the frame of the Nobel Prize ceremonies. Could you show me some of the pictures?
I have a lot of memories, but of course I can't give you any details about that.
No, we don't ask the secrets of Nobel.
But the Science, the American paper, had an article called "The Riddle of the Nobel Debate" at the time when Hounsfield and Cormack got the prize for computer tomography. And what all the press could notice was that the Nobel Committee didn't seem to be too well prepared for the presentation of the prize winners. So there was a lot of guess about this, which you can read in the... And I was accused to be the one who had lobbied for the
Well, I
prize.
guess that you were the great eminence, because what I guess the Nobel Assembly had the principle to give mostly to basic scientists. And you fought for development, the discovery, which was not clearly basic science.
No.
And I guess that you were the great eminence. You don't need to say it. But anyway, you were instrumental both to give the Nobel Prize for the CT scan discovery for Hounsfield and Cormack.
Yes.
Is it correct?
Yes, of course I was in the assembly, and I
Yes.
took. I
Yes.
can tell you that I took part in discussion about.
Yeah. And not only that, but you presented then.
Yes, this is due to the fact that I was the first investigator. When one has when there is a suggestion of the prize coming into they make an investigation, and I was asked to make the first investigation. In this addition, that the first investigator, which is a member of the assembly, also present the prize winner at the ceremony.
Your rich activity, scientific activity, opened for you the faculty of the Karolinska Institute. You became a member of the Nobel Assembly. You were one of the great eminence behind the decision to give the Nobel Prize for the discovery or development of the CT scan. And I want you to tell us a little about this episode, about Hauswild's visit as a Nobel Prize winner to Stockholm and Cormac's, his visit to Karolinska Hospital, the neuroradiology, your beautiful presentation of the discovery, and all this.
Of course, I can't tell you very much about what actually took place in the Nobel Assembly, but it was quite evident, as was also pointed out by the American paper Science, that the Nobel Committee at that occasion was not quite prepared to present the prize winner that had been chosen. And they thought that it has been a longer discussion than usual in the assembly. And the one who was to blame for this prolongation of the discussion was myself, who was said to have lobbied extensively for the CAT scanner. Anyway, I was then chosen to present the winners at the prize ceremony due to the fact that I had made the first investigation following the proposal that had been made. And this is tradition that the first investigator and member of the assembly presents the Nobel winners at the ceremony. So you asked me to say something about
your presentation,
yes.
Which were both literary and scientific.
Oh, yes. I started by saying that sometimes art may adumbrate reality, and by quoting actually my father's old friend and the Swedish Nobel Prize winner Harry Martinson, who wrote a quite famous poem about the spaceship Anjara. In this poem, Martinson describes how the computer guardian, the Mimarob, one day, with the aid of the formula cycles phase by phase, was able to see into the transtomies and look through everything as though it were glass. And that at this discovery he became almost mad. And from that I went on to say that here the poet in one single stanza had captured the essentials of computer tomography. You have to have a powerful computer, you have to have a mathematical formula that could, perhaps using the Fourier transforms phase by phase, and finally the result is just transtomies. That means transfer sections through the human body of unusually, at that time, unbelievable clarity. So that's about the
and here you have a picture of
myself, yes. giving the speech before the royal family, and my chair is empty there, and here I have filled the chair at that
Torgney Greitz and as the
Queen and the Swedish king.
Swedish king.
Yeah.
And he is house-filled with...
At that occasion he visited our department, so here is the first scanner on the continent, as the British engineer said who installed this. And this is Hansfield and this is myself.
Well, and if we are at this CT scan, and when you tried the first time, you wanted to try it with Oliver Krona.
Oliver Krona passed by.
How was it?
When we were just about to do the first image, and I invited Oliver Krona and say it would be a marvelous thing to have his brain as the first image in our scanner. It would be an historical event. But he refused, saying that it's better that people go around and think that I have an atrophic brain, rather than I lay down there and prove that it is. And
that was a historical...
It's unbelievable that we thought that these kind of images
are of good quality.
Are good quality.
And informative.
Yes. And informative, yes. This is the very first, it's number one, the very first CT scan made on the European continent.
Torgney, we are taking this interview for the archive of the Cushing Society, and you had so many contacts with Oliver Krona and Lexell and Norlén, etc. Please shortly characterize these personalities. What do you think about Oliver Krona as a man, as a neurosurgeon, as a scientist, and the same thing about Lexell, Norlén?
Yeah, of course, when I first met Oliver Krona, I felt a great deal of respect for him. He had a very, say, stern appearance, and I knew that he had a very, like in the X-ray department, the discipline that he kept was quite hard, and he had a great demand on his co-workers. But I found out by working with him that the surface was didn't get a complete picture of his interior, and what I found out that was he cared for not only for his patients but very much also for his co-workers, and was very supporting for all of us. And I remember when he retired, he continued to do surgery at a private hospital, and but the neuroradiological examination were made for him, were made by myself. But he was very worried about the fact that I didn't have any other private practice, and he said that you have to acquire that, because you can't not only rely on me, because I may, who knows, I may not be more than 120 years, and maybe I may even stop operating at the age of 100. But he was. I was, of course, not present when, I mean, in 1925, when he first started to do neurosurgery in Stockholm. But I heard many stories from these early times. And and this perhaps illustrates a little his personality. But I remember I was told that he once operated a brain tumor on an old woman, and as he had turned the skin flap and just were beginning to make the first borehole, the lady said, "God bless the professor and God guide the professor at this difficult operation."
The surgery was done at that time in local anesthesia?
Yes, yes, yes. So the first Olivia didn't answer. The only answer she got was that he was doing the first borehole. And then she repeated, "God bless the professor and God guide the professor at this difficult operation." And this was repeated one or two times more. And finally, Olivia said, "Shut up, all women. Here it's me who is operating."
And what about his pupil, this very talented young people, at that time young people, and then grow up in famous neurosurgeons, Norlén and Lexell? Were they like their teacher? Were they different? In what were they different?
Of course, I didn't know all of them so well and personally, but of course I got to know Lars Lexell quite well, and of course, if I talk about him, so to speak, professionally, he was not the kind of operating surgeon as Oliver Krohn. I mean, he had, of course, like Lysholm, a very creative mind, and I mean his achievements are too well known. I think that we have to touch upon them here, and I think that and this was also, I think, reflected in their personalities as you talk to them. I mean, Oliver Krohn was that stern, I think probably somewhat shy at the same time, but Lexell was very easy to get along with.
Expansive, extrovert.
He was very extrovert, yes, yes. And I had a lot of very stimulating talk to him, and he was very open-minded with regard to his ideas and the problems and so forth. So, of course, there was between us a certain, when I went into the development of stereotaxy, there was a certain competition between us, and I think we mutually took things from each other, like the first fixation system that we did. We took the plastic helmet that Lexell had been using and attached it to a base plate and so forth, and vice versa. I think that Lexell finally adapted in his system the graphical solution of deciding the coordinates. So there was, I think, a competition, but in some way it was also a mutual cooperation.
Now, to round up this discussion, I would like you to muse about the present and future of neuroradiology. And I would like to start with one thing which I remember many years ago when I discussed with you the interventional endovascular neuroradiology. At that time, it was mostly for arterial venous malformation. And you were very negative. You said, no, that is not the future. And actually, you didn't want to start with that in your department. Now, in the perspective of the time, do you think you were correct, or you would qualify your attitude?
Actually, I wouldn't say that it was negative to interventional radiology. I mean, we had made interventional radiology by, for example, here by puncturing cystic tumors.
Intermedullary cystic.
Intermedullary
it's
tumors,
correct,
yes. And what I was negative was, I think, the interventional radiology of arteriovenous malformations. I would perhaps limit my negative attitude to that area. I think that, for example, the balloon occlusion of our cavernous fistula we took up and we made here, and that is also continuing. But what I at that time could compare the results that you yourself had with radiosurgery of arterial malformations, and with the reports that we had from the interventionalists. And there was not one single report that one could get satisfactory information from. It was always that way, that so many cases the results were satisfactory, and so many cases the result was less satisfactory, and there were so many failures. But they never, each author did not define what was satisfactory. And we also had the experience that the risk of a new hemorrhage remained as long as you had any remnant of the nidus, or not even if even we had a case where the nidus was gone and we just saw a early filling of one drainage vein, and that patient had a new hemorrhage from that very malformation. So as long as we didn't have any proof of the efficacy of embolization, I was very skeptical to that. And I still am, as if you consider embolization as the only treatment for AVMs, I think there is a place for embolization with regard to the combined treatment. If you have a lesion which is too big for radiosurgery, then you can embolize part of it and radiate the rest.
And now, once again, how do you see the future of neuroradiology? Is still some marginal for development, or you think that it was everything exhausted?
Yes, of course, there has been a revolution in imaging. So neuroradiology has changed dramatically. I mean, I remember once 10 years ago I said it's peculiar that we may spend today doing exclusively things that we didn't do at all 10 years earlier. So there has been a tremendous change, and that also means that not only that the work have changed, also that we need perhaps a new breed of neuroradiologists. And there may be, even within neuroradiology, a certain need of subspecialization. For example, in the old days, you had to be technically skillful, and you needed a very good spatial orientation, yes. The ability to think in 3 dimensions. Because I used to say that what we did before was that we did a 3-dimensional reconstructions from 2 projections in our head and described that to the neurosurgeons. Today, this is not necessary. You observe the 2 dimensions in an image, and the third dimension is given you by the slice, the level of the slice. So, and also the production of the images are made by technicians. So this acquires a new knowledge by, I think today it's possible to make a much more accurate differential diagnosis. And so you need to know even more of neuropathology today, and also I think of you need more perhaps of clinical knowledge of neurology and neurosurgery than we needed in the old days. And so this, I think there is people who are now going into neuroradiology are in some ways another type of people. And also the training, as I said, needs a certain subspecialization, and it also is a multidisciplinary work today. I mean, the research you have to include neuroradiologists, neurophysiologists, and clinicians like neurosurgeons and neurologists, and physicists and computer specialists and so forth.
But you see a future, and a good future for the neuroradiology, so you would advise a young man, bright young man who wants to make research, yes, and work, you would advise him, go. Yes, go ahead, go into neuroradiology.
It's a fantastic future.
Yes.
I mean, we are not able to look only at structures, but also on function. Not only with PET and SPECT, but also we have with a functional MRI, and you have magnetoencephalography, which can be combined with the anatomic information.
Yeah.
So, but this means, I think that we need a basic training, not only in these methods, but perhaps also in the clinical sciences, and perhaps we need, for example, intervention neuroradiology to have people which are not trained in general radiology, but which are trained in, let's say, neurosurgery and neuroradiology. In the old days, it was not allowed for a neuroradiologist to have his clinical training in neurology and neurosurgery. He was forced to take that in general surgery and general.
That was not logical, of course.
That was not logical. I fought very much to change it.
Torgney, how about to finish it with a message to the American neuroradiologists and neurosurgeons?
Yes, the message would be that I would like to thank my American colleagues for the education that I have got from them. It has been said here that I brought, was responsible, one of them was responsible for bringing the modern neuroradiology into the States. But at the same time, I learned very much from already at that time from my American colleagues, and in the following years, I have a lot of contacts with them and learned a lot. And as I said, when I became a member of the American College of Radiology, that today the Americans have passed us and are in most respects ahead of us. And so I hope that the cooperation and the mutual interchange of ideas will continue in the future. I think that not even we, but also perhaps the American neuroradiologists can profit from that cooperation.
Yeah. Thank you, Torgney. It was a pleasure after so many years to have a long chat with you.
Thank you, Ladislau. It was a nice talk we had. Thank you very much.